Morning again, friends and brothers in Christ. Some years ago, about 10 years ago, Time magazines features a study that proposed to name the 100 most significant people in the history. Okay, and this study's this author, he filtered through over 9,000 names and came up with a list of the most significant people in history. And here is the top 10. All right, there's Thomas Jefferson, who is one of the founding father of the United States, and he is the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. So he played quite a pivotal role in shaping the very early United States with his commitment to individual rights and democratic principles. And then on number 9, there was Alexander the Great, a military genius and conqueror, and his empire stretched across 3 continents, leaving a lasting impact on the ancient world, especially with the Greek influence in different regions during his time. On number 8 is the famous philosopher Aristotle, whose teaching founded the Western philosophy and science and have great influence, even from ethics also to biology even. And number 7, it was Hitler. Obviously, the list is not based on popularity, but it's known for his role in World War II and the Holocaust, and Hitler's titanical leadership has a great impact in history. Number 6 is George Washington. Not surprised they choose their presidents in the list. Is the first president of the United States, military leader during the American Revolutionary War, and his leadership, etc. Number 5, Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States during the Civil War, and he's played a very crucial role in shaping the nations and ending the slavery. All right. Number 4 is Shakespeare. Say no more. Okay, we all know him. On number 3 is Muhammad. It's not the boxer or Muhammad, but the founder of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad. Teachings and leadership has been influencing the lives and beliefs of billions of people, even today. On second place, come to my surprise, is Napoleon. Well, you watch the movie, I don't want to spend too much time on him. Great conqueror, ruler, conquest to Europe, and left a huge impact on military strategies and governance. First place, do we need to guess who that is? No need for introduction, for Jesus. All right. I think it's interesting that Time magazine would recognize that Jesus was the most significant person in human history. And the authors of that study examined over 9,000 names. But I'm pretty sure, I haven't gone through all the 9,000 names, but I'm pretty sure there was one significant person in history that did not make the cut. Someone who even most Christians would never think of being important or significant, and yet I think he was. In fact, this one individual was more important to world history to me than Shakespeare or Lincoln or Washington put together. And I think his name is Pontius Pilate. It's so important that we even recite his name in Apostles' Creed. Well, Pontius Pilate, what on earth would I believe that he was one of the most significant men who ever lived? Well, you have to wait until the end of the sermon to find out why I think that way. But in the meantime, let me tell you a bit more about Pilate. According to one source, Pilate was a cold, cruel, calculating politician who played all the angles. Jesus was crucified about 33 AD, and Pilate was the governor of Judea between 26 to 36 AD. And in that time, Pilate has managed to accumulate a large number of enemies, which was not hard because Jerusalem was not an easy place to rule. The Jews hated the Romans and would riot and revolt at drop of hat. And that's why Pilate makes sure whenever there was a feast day in Jerusalem where thousands of Jews would gather in one city, he always makes sure that he has several hundred soldiers on hand, because with that many Jews in one place, it was a recipe for disaster. But when he was not in Jerusalem, Pilate's home was in Caesarea Maritima. Now, Caesarea Maritima has been built by Herod the Great as a seaport on the Mediterranean. And he also built a summer palace there. And when he died, that palace became the living quarters of governors in the regions. So Pilate was living a very good life. He was living in the palace of Herod the Great was built. Now, going back to Jerusalem, where there are a lot of riots happening. Now, these riots were happening in Judea, but would put Pilate in jeopardy with Caesar. And in 36 AD, Pilate was ordered back to Rome to stand trial for the cruelty and oppressions, particularly on the charge that he had had some men executed without a proper trial. So the verdict is that the emperor would order Pilate to take his own life. This was the short and ugly story of the man who had Jesus crucified. Now, by the time Jesus stood before Pilate, Pilate would ill afford another revolt. And knowing this, the Jewish leaders demanded that he put Jesus to death. He already made a lot of this dodgy decision in the past. He knew that the emperor is not very impressed with his handling of Jerusalem and Judea. And he can sense, as an experienced politician, he can sense that something is cooking in Jerusalem during that week. He knew that this Jesus came to the city, and the tension between him and the Jewish leader is leading to something huge. He can sense that Pilate's feeling the pressure. Oh, is this going to be a start of another revolt or riot in the city? And you can almost sense the struggle that Pilate was going through at that time, trying to avoid executing Jesus. This is perhaps not something that he wanted to do, but he was trapped, and he knows it, and he does not like it. And he tells the Jewish leader in John 18, verse 31, so Pilate says, take him yourself and judge him by your own law. What is he trying to say? He's saying, you don't ask me to make this decision. You have your own law. You can judge him yourself. But they objected and said, but we have no right to execute anyone. So at that time, the Jewish has their own law. They have some freedom to practice their own law, but none of those laws can allow them to execute anyone. So the ball is back on Pilate's court. Now, after interviewing Jesus, he tells the Jews in John chapter 18, verse 33, what is the truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But the Jews refused to back off. And later on in chapter 19, verse 12, we were told that from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." And things are quickly getting out of hand. And Pilate realizes that if he let Jesus go, he will have revolt on his hands. And he can't afford that. He's feeling the heat from the people above him. There's no choice. Jesus has to die. But before Pilate made that decision, he had this interesting conversation with Jesus. All Pilate wants to know is if Jesus is a threat to Rome. So he asked in verse 33, in chapter 18 of John, he says, Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" This is because if Jesus intended to stage an armed revolt, then Pilate would have the ground to crucify him. But Jesus didn't answer him that way. This is his answer to Jesus. "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leader. But now my kingdom is from another place." In other words, Jesus knew what was in Pilate's mind. Pilate's thinking, okay, if you're a king, that if you have a group of people who try to start a revolt, that's great, then I can crucify you, have the ground. But Jesus said, you know what? My kingdom is not of this world. If it is, as you were thinking in your head, that my servant will fight for me. But that didn't happen, because my kingdom is from another place. Despite what the Jews believed, and despite what some Christians even today have believed, Jesus did not come to set up an earthly kingdom. But that was never the plan. There was never going to be an earthly kingdom, because Jesus' kingdom was not of this world. There's no earthly boundaries. And you can't point to a spot on the map and say, here it is. Because Christ's kingdom is not of this world. But if Christ's kingdom is not of this world, then where is it? Well, if you read the Bible from the book of Colossians, chapter 1, tells us that for he has rescued us from the dominion of the darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. In other words, we who are Christians are in the kingdom of Christ right now. The kingdom of Christ is in us. The church is a spiritual kingdom, and his kingdom is wherever we are. Just like on every Sunday morning or any time in the world, whenever people gathered and worship, that's the kingdom of Christ. There's no boundaries. There's no particular spot on earth, but wherever Christians are gathered. That's the meaning of the church. Now, that is an interesting piece of theology, but Jesus isn't focused on theology. He's focused on Pilate. He's standing before the man who can and will sentence him to death. And he's actually witnessing to him. You know, Pilate asked Jesus if he is the king of the Jews. Jesus responded in verse 34. Is that your own idea? Or did others talk to you about me? In other words, do you actually know who I am personally? Did someone just put that idea into your head, or you actually think that way? It was like Jesus was saying, even now, Pilate, you can have a choice. You can decide to get to know me, choose me. But you have got to make a choice. Did someone else force you to make a choice, or did yourself making that choice? And to which Pilate responded, whoa, back up the train. I'm not a Jew. And that's when Jesus tells Pilate his kingdom's not of this world. He thinks that, Jesus come to be the king of the Jews, but I'm not a Jew. It doesn't concern me. All these things doesn't really concern me. It's your business, it's your conflict between you and the Jewish leaders and the people of Jerusalem. I'm not. I'm a governor from Rome. It's not about me. It's not my decision. But she said, no, it's your decision. You need to know who I am. Do you think that I'm a king? So Pilate continued and we keep repeating the questions. He asked Jesus, are you a king then? Then Jesus says the most unusual thing. In chapter 18, verse 37, Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and come into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What was Jesus saying? He's saying, you say I'm a king, and I was born to be a king. But the purpose of being born to be a king is to testify to the truth, so that people can know the truth. And people who follow me would listen to the truth and will be standing on side of the truth. Now, Pilate is a very smart person. He said, what is the truth? What is the truth? That's the end of the conversation. Now, the questions that come to my mind as I read this was, why did Jesus bring up this issue of truth to Pilate? It has not been discussed before, and Pilate seems to almost react violently when it's mentioned, what is the truth? The very mention of truth seems to trigger a response from deep within him, because Pilate was not someone who cares about the truth. It has been like that for all his life. He's fighting for his political importance. He's going up the ranks. And he tried to do different things, say different things to different people, try to gain political power. Truth does not matter to him. As the governor, as a successful governor in that system, he is someone who has been bending the truth all his life. What was going on here? I think this is the thing. We live in a world that bends the rules a lot. A lot of people believe that if you want to get ahead in politics or in business or even in relationship, you have to sacrifice the truth once in a while. The rules hem us in. The rules make it so that we are not as free to do what we want to do. And that's pretty much how Pilate has lived his life. That's how he has gotten to the position of power. He bends the rules. He hurts who he has to hurt. He cheats who he has to cheat. Because that's the name of the game, is to win. Now, there was an old book whose title was called Winning by Intimidation. I don't know how many had heard of it or read the book. And the major theme of the book was, it's quite a stir when it first came out, is that the major theme of the book, the central message of the book, is basically saying, you do what you got to do to win. You cheat, you hurt, you imitate, and if needed be, you destroy people who stand in your way. Because the name of the game is to win. Now, you may have come across these kind of people at school, at work, even in gaming. People were committed to winning at any cost, even including cheating, lying, and even making false accusations. But you know what? I believe that everybody knows there is a standard of truth. Deep inside of everyone, there's an understanding that there's a standard of right and wrong. You even hear it from children on the playground, right? That's not right. That's not fair. By saying that, it means that there's a standard of fairness. Everyone inherently understand. And everybody knows that truth. The only thing that is that they just do not live by it. In John chapter 3, verse 20, describe that truth by telling us that everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. And that is what Pilate has done all his life. He has done wicked things in his life that makes him uncomfortable, and that he has abandoned the truth because it makes him uncomfortable. He hates the light of truth because it exposes his evil. And that's why he reacted to Jesus' comment about the truth. How dare you tell me about the truth? Nobody tells me about the truth. Because I knew it. And I just don't give any attention to it. But I suspect that the truth has just begun to gnaw at his conscience. And I suspect he even began to consider changing. And I think that's why Jesus brought it up. There was still a chance that Pilate could become a different man. There was a chance that he might have embraced the truth that was Jesus. Just like how Jesus treated Judas. Time and time and time again gave him a chance to change. And I believe Jesus is doing the same with Pilate. Jesus once said in John chapter 14, verse 6, he says, I am the way and truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now the truth is this, is that all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And we are all sinners who need of forgiveness. We need a fresh start. And everyone knows it. Everyone knows that they have done bad stuff. And that's why people think they need to do enough good stuff to outweigh the bad stuff in their lives. But the problem is they can't. And they know it. That's why people worry if they have done enough. Something inside of them gnaws at their conscience and they do not feel right about themselves. And I believe that is why Jesus came to die on the cross for us. Jesus came as the truth that declared that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Jesus came to die for our sins. He died on the cross to cover the things that shame us with his blood. And that brings me back to the promise I made in the beginning of the sermon. Why I believe that Pilate was one of the most important person in history. And this is the reason. Without Pilate, Jesus would not have died on the cross. Pilate was the only man with the power at that time to fulfill the prophecy Jesus made of how he was to die. Pilate had to make the decision to crucify Jesus so that Jesus would die for our sins. But we do not praise Pilate. We do not want to, erect a statue in his honor. He was forced to a decision that he not even want to make. But on the other hand, we praise Jesus. We praise about his crucifixion. as Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Oops. What did I do? Oops. Can you get back to that? 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23. It says, "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God." So the question this morning is this: what will you do with Jesus? If Jesus is standing right in front of you now, just like he's standing in front of Pilate, what will you do with Jesus? What Pilate did with Jesus was that he had Jesus crucified. And what would you do with him? Would you say to Jesus, "You know what? Yeah, it's good that you're here, but I don't really need you right now. Can you get into the closet for now? Can you come up when I needed you? But please don't come up when you don't need me, because I want to do something by myself." Or someone just get out of my house. Or do we welcome him into every aspect of our life? There was an old poem, actually a hymn, a verse from a hymn. It said, "What would you do with Jesus?" Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall, friendless, forsaken, betrayed by all. Hearken what meaneth the sudden call. What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will he do with me? May God help us.